So when I've done this talk once before. I gave it at Utah Code Camp, but the title wasn't this Backbone Hogan title. It was actually this title. It was a title called the browser is the platform. Now the problem with that is it attracted like a lot of really kind of non-technical people who like, I think they like wanted to learn about the Chrome Web Store or something. I don't know, but like my overwhelming feedback was like, oh, it was way too complicated. And so I was actually really nervous. I was like, maybe I should cut down and focus in on one thing. But then I spent a ton of time like trying to come up with a metaphor between AMD and like a philosopher, because that always has like some sort of impact when you see like a 1400s like philosopher picture. And I'm like, I'm gonna tell you this guy relates to AMD, you know. But unfortunately, didn't work out. And I kind of banked that this being Utah open source should be more of a technical crowd. So hopefully you guys will enjoy. So, oh yes, thebestpictureontheinternet.com. This is actually a real website, and it changed my life. The contrast is actually not doing it justice, but it's just like, something about this is really moving. I don't know what it is. And also, at any point in time, feel free to email my boss and tell him that I'm awesome. I need a raise, things like that, but I don't actually need a raise, but I'd love it if you guys told them I'm great. Everyone write that email down. All right, so my name is Merrick Christensen. I work at Domo, where we do, well, this is being recorded, so I'm not sure what my PR people want me to say. So I'll say we're revamping business intelligence. In the past, I built lots of high-profile websites for lots of these like name dropper brands, but really it's just code, same way. I love coding. I spend lots of time on open source channels, mostly focused on this kind of client-side architecture right now. I think it's just a blast, and it's moving so fast that that's cool. And this is a really happy picture of me. I was pretty happy. All right, so what I'm going to talk about, moving your application logic to the browser. What was your name?
Jason.
Jason made a point that he likes JavaScript because you can move your UI to the client, and you can relegate your services to kind of just be your APIs, and they can focus more on security and performance, scalability, these kinds of things. And that's pretty much exactly what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to talk about one approach to that today. There's a number of approaches. This is one that I've used a number of times and iterated on, and I quite like it. Adding structure and modularity to your client code. This is where require.js, or AMD, which stands for asynchronous module definition, comes into play. How many of you guys are installing globals and then like namespacing stuff? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I know there's some shame in like admitting to that, but it's normal, you know. But we're gonna talk about getting around that. These are the technologies that we're gonna be focused on today. I know I said Hogan. I'm actually going to use Handlebars.js. They're actually the same thing in large part. They're both compilers for a templating language. And anything that's valid mustache is actually going to get compiled by Handlebars as well. So sorry if you guys wanted like a Hogan rundown, I can give you one later. All right, so the problem is DOM coupled, non-maintainable, global dependent, round trip to the server code. You constantly are having people who are making these requests to the server to get their markup, right? They're getting their markup, they're taking it down, it's in the document object model, and they're taking like jQuery or insert other hipster library here, and then they're grabbing DOM elements and they're making a public namespace, and you have this kind of noodly code. Problem is it's not very scalable. Also requires like a middle tier between your services that you're going to have to implement for just your web services, and it's just not very maintainable. So this is the kind of code I'm talking about. I actually pulled this out of the Rails repository like not long ago at all. So like I said, they're keeping all of their state in the DOM, which is just about the slowest way to store your state. Oh man, I hope this guy comes in. There's not very many people in here. It'd be cool if there's more. Yeah, don't worry about it, man. Don't worry about it. I don't have feelings. All right. So anyways, so you're pulling these like stuff out of the DOM, right? They're grabbing attributes and they're doing this weird sort of, they're really coupling their DOM to their JavaScript logic. And so A, that's not very maintainable. B, the DOM is about the slowest way to write an app. And also you have all these kind of intrusive things you wouldn't expect being connected, right? Like if I change the UJS submit button, like that's game over for me. Even worse, this is from W3 Schools. This is the kind of stuff that makes me not want to build web apps anymore. This is like the general education going around. They're like, hey guys, this is what I do. And then I like weep on the phone to my mom for a few hours because I have to maintain somebody's code that's like this. You got this gross sort of attribute function tied stuff. Everybody's seen this kind of stuff, right? Probably done this kind of stuff. I have too, don't worry. I've been building web apps, and when I started it wasn't this bad. I never did it this bad. I was definitely this bad though. But I was like still in diapers when people were doing it like this. All right, so the problem with this approach, code and state revolving around the DOM grows unmaintainably pretty much instantly. You have all these different templates that your server's compiling, and then you have this sort of abstract layer that's manipulating this markup, and eventually it just becomes kind of a mess. There's no structure, there's no real design patterns. Historically, everyone just shoves everything into like the $sign object, you know? Like, when you have a $sign, it's money. Like everybody just, like they thrive on that. They're like, oh, this isn't really dependent on jQuery, but I can make it a jQuery plugin and get like 1,000 more downloads. I'm guilty of that, by the way. Sometimes like if I hang this off the $sign, people will respect it more than they do. Which is a sad thought, but global variables are everywhere. Somebody will do something like window.app is equal to, or window.namespace, and they'll shove everything inside of there. And there's no real protection against that. You can forget, you know, there's just no protection of that. There's no immediately invoked function invocation to protect you from accidentally doing that. And it feels really natural to add more, to say window.models and then store all your models in there, and say window.controllers and store all your controllers in there. And eventually you have a whole bunch of keys that make your code far less maintainable, or modular if you wanted to grab, say, your controllers, take it to another site who also has a controllers key, and then you have to do some sort of merging, and it's just not a very fun way to live. Like I said, the DOM is about the slowest way to write an app. It's not only less maintainable, but when you're grabbing stuff out of the DOM, doing stuff with it, I'm being a dead horse and it's intentional, it's painfully slow, not just unmaintainable. If you actually run the performances on it, it's performance tests, it's usually better construct streams. And inner HTML actually just got a huge boost in Safari, or WebKit I should say. There's no structure to it. Like literally, I'm pretty sure this is like a motto in the jQuery community. Grab something and do something to it, and then, yeah, I think that's like promoted talk around there. So first thing I'm gonna talk about, getting rid of those globals and making our code more modular. So if I wanted to take some code from somebody else and implement it into my app in JavaScript, typically they install something global. So if I wanted to take like some interesting, I don't know, DOM manipulation tool, and I wanted to use it, it's basically like put this script tag on your page and then you'll have access to this function. But now I've got this global added to it, and globals are kind of intrinsically bad. Not always, but it's just not, it can blast away your code, it can carry its own dependencies and install globals that you weren't aware it was going to install, and the APIs are not uniform, so if you wanted to grab it and take it elsewhere, you have to make sure that it conforms with your app's namespace. And historically, the approach to this was like, everybody owns a key, right? Everybody owns, I own jQuery, I own UI. Problem is that didn't work very well. Oh, nice. Sorry about that, guys. By the way, if like any of you guys want to focus on any particular tech more than the other ones, please let me know. If anything I say is like ridiculously stupid, also let me know. Like, I can totally deal with the embarrassment. And if anybody's like, this sucks, I want to leave, my feelings won't be hurt at all. Well, maybe a little bit, but. So anyways, AMD stands for Asynchronous Module Definition. There's been a ton of attempts to bring modules into JavaScript. There's been CommonJS, which is more of a server layer thing. There's nowadays AMD, which is good because it's, don't worry about it, parallel stuff. And so you can download things parallel, and once they're all done, it will then hand you all the things that it downloaded. What's nice about a module specification is now I can say, okay, give me this guy's code, and I'm going to use it as this. And his code is actually all anonymous, and he just exports an interface that I can consume. If you're familiar with like Python or Ruby or Java or anything like that, it's very normal to just say, okay, I'm going to have this jar, and then I'm going to import it, and then I'm going to reference it. In JavaScript, unfortunately, it's not been like that historically. It's like, I'm going to have this jar, and then it's going to install everything in my scope, right? That's what the equivalent of is in JavaScript. And you could, any object-oriented programmer could tell you that that's an inefficient way to write code. So we've got this, it's asynchronous loading. So meaning all of your dependencies will be downloading at the same time. It helps you think about modular code. This is, in my opinion, the biggest win. It lets you think, okay, I need to export an interface that this person's going to consume. It's less about the performance gains, because honestly, you won't often get the performance gains when writing AMD modules. You would build those and get similar performance. Completely getting rid of globals. In AMD, everything is abstracted into these closures. And then there's excellent community adoption. AMD has massive momentum. It's got jQuery support. Dojo is dependent on it for the entire framework. MooTools is also AMD based. Well, MooTools 2 is AMD based. So it's a lot of people are moving to this common definition. So now if I want to compose something of these multiple frameworks, I can say require jQuery and then require class from MooTools. So now I can use MooTools class with jQuery DOM manipulation tools. And I can kind of compose things where they're best rather than say, man, it's too bad MooTools blasts the $sign and jQuery blasts the $sign because now I have to do some no conflict work. It does come with a build tool, so you're not making tons of requests. It runs in Node.js, and it's actually really awesome. It traces all of your dependencies and compiles them to one file, and it will uglify it if you want, or it'll even run it through like Google closure optimizations, things like that. Supports strategic loading. So say I intentionally want to defer the loading of a certain piece of my application. Say I want to, I like to give the Gmail example. If I'm lazily loading chat, because most users aren't actually interacting with chat, most of the time they're going to Gmail. They're going in there and they're checking their mail and they're leaving. So we can give them some performance improvements by lazily loading chat when they click on it. AMD lends itself to this, where CommonJS does not. So it's very browser centric. So now I can say, okay, they click chat, go get the code, initialize the module. They do support CommonJS syntax with a wrapper. So if you like the CommonJS approach, which is what's used in the Node community, you can use that. There's lots of useful AMD plugins. So now I get to give you guys an example. So what I'm going to do actually this time around is I'm going to show you how you're going to just grab this require.js code. I just went to requirejs.org. And then I'm going to make an index HTML file for it, for my web app. So now I've got require.js, and I have an index.html. Can you guys see this, by the way? Okay, good. Now I'm going to just make like a lib directory for my code. I'm just going to open this up in an editor. So in case the command line was too ambiguous for you, it's got just require.js in a regular require.js file. Then I've got index.html, which is empty. So I've included require.js using a regular script tag. Nothing too abstract here. This is how you'd include any other library, right? So require.js is going to install two globals, require and define, and that's all you should have when you're using an AMD thing. The thing about AMD is don't get it intermixed with require.js. AMD is a specification that's implemented by require.js. There's 7 or 8 loaders that I could name off the top of my head that implement the same specification that you could replace require.js with. Require.js has kind of just led the charge a little bit. So if I kill this node server and I go to that winning folder on my desktop, and I'm going to serve it. Okay. So now what we can do is we can give require.js what's called a main attribute, and we can say your main is going to be like this. So if you're familiar with a compiled language like Java, you typically have a main function. It's kind of the entry point to your application, and you can move forward with that. That's actually kind of a nice programming pattern because you can trace all of the way your app goes from entry point outwards, whereas in JavaScript, things can just do things all over the place. So now we're going to make that main file, and this is what a require.js or AMD module looks like. You call this define keyword, and you pass it a closure. So now what we can do is I can console log run in here, and see how require.js went and got that JavaScript file, and it loaded it on the page, and we console logged run. So what happened here is we have index.html, which includes require.js. Require.js knows which script tag was leveraged. It goes and finds a data-main. Now you don't have to use data-main. And it said my initial module is lib/main. And so now we've offloaded. Typically, this is the extent of the work I do in HTML files when I'm doing clients. This is it. Everything else I offload to JavaScript construction.
It loads those JavaScripts asynchronously then? So
it does, yeah. So main, oftentimes it'll have tons of dependencies, and it'll wait for all the dependencies to be loaded, map them to their corresponding arguments, which I'm going to show you in a second, and then execute them accordingly. However, sometimes you don't want to take advantage of that asynchronous parallel loading because it makes sense just to build to one file. You don't need to defer anything like the chat example earlier. So oftentimes you'll take this entry point, you'll give it to RJS, you'll say trace my dependencies, build it, and minify it, and so you can have one nice little thing. Where the asynchronous comes in is that you don't have to do a build while you're developing, which is really nice with AMD. I don't have to sit there and run a build every time I save a file. My errors actually show up from like if we were to throw an error in this lib main, typically if this were built into a, see how it actually shows up as coming from main? It's because it's actually that file. It's not building into some weird one file right now. I can actually reference the same file it's from. So I'm going to give this a dependency, and we're going to call that 1. So, and then we're going to map it to 1. One is not going to have, so I'm going to again call define to define my module. Then I'm going to return my interface. Man, I installed Syntactic and it just teaches me that I don't care about semicolons. That's all it's done for me. So this syntax, when you return something out of a module, that becomes the entry point. That's what gets mapped to the argument of your callback. So now what I can say is I can say the interface I'm exporting is hey. That's what you can call it. It's an object and it's hey. You can return functions out of here. You can return pretty much anything out of here. But what's really nice about this is it gives you some of that protection that you typically have coming from an object-oriented language. Namely, I can implement a facade interface where my API is stable, and I can do some real nasty stuff in there just to prove the interface. Once the interface is good, then I can implement it, and my API consumers aren't affected by that.
So,
please.
Yeah, in the main JS, can you go back to that?
Absolutely.
It all went too fast for me, I guess.
No.
Where did the one and stuff go? You had some kind of, was that in required JS? Where in the heck was that thing? Where you said?
Oh, where I started to do the arguments thing? I undid that because I was like, oh man, I'm jumping the gun.
Oh, okay.
Your attention span is great though, because like I forgot about that. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to bring it back to that, but I wanted to just show how you return your interface.
Okay, so now in the main.
Now in the main, we want to consume module 1. Okay?
Oh, okay. So one's not going to show up anywhere.
Nope,
right
it's
now.
nowhere right now.
Okay.
It's like some unknown magic thing. Yeah. So what we can do though is we can now consume one by giving it its module path. So this could be, to give you an example, this could be, you know, mootools class, for example. And that would go into a folder called mootools, and it would fetch the class module. That could be jQuery, and it would return the $sign. In this case, we're referencing our own module, which happens to be 1, and I'm going to map it to 1. So now I can say 1.hey and console.log 1, just so you guys can see it.
Okay, so that function thing up there, you're passing it.
Yeah, so this is the callback that will be executed once all of your dependencies are loaded, okay? 1 doesn't happen to have any dependencies, so I omitted that first array parameter. So what's going to happen is it's going to go find 1, it's going to see where the defined call is. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the top, and it's going to find the callback. First, it's going to trace the dependencies, it's going to find the callback, and it's going to run it. Whatever's returned from that callback is what becomes the interface into that module.
Okay, and what's being returned here is the string hey and...
Oh no, this is a JavaScript object. See the 2 curlies?
That's what I...
Yeah.
That's
Sorry,
It's not scope, that's an actual object.
that's a object literal is what they're called. Just key value. Value can be functions, whatever.
So what happens if you get an incompetent developer that manages to write a circular dependency?
Require.js actually handles them. It can be frustrating sometimes. The way that it's handled is that you have to use common JS syntax. But one of the things about, like you said, usually a circular dependency like that is a sign of a not so good design. But Require.js does let you do it. And they have a thing on their website that'll explain how that works. Good question, by the way. So we have our 1 module, which is returning an object literal, which is the hey key, right? Now I'm requiring the 1 module. I'm mapping it to 1, and I'm calling that hey. So this is that object that was returned, and this is that hey method. So if I come back here, we have that hey echoed. If I go over here to console, we can inspect this. And it's an anonymous object with hey as the interface. Rather than saying 1.hey is equal to this function and polluting the Windows space, or making it so no one else could consume the 1 module unless they attached it to their global space, we now have an anonymous API that we can toss around between projects. One of the interesting things is these are completely subjective. So if we name that TWOL, which I have no idea why I did that, we get hey from TWOL. So even though the module is still exporting like its interface, we actually named it TWOL in our case, and we're able to reference it that way. So if you can think about this in terms of a more useful context, we could require jQuery, and then we could require, well, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but mootools class, and then mootools class, if it installs a $sign, we could actually rename it to something else. So we have jQuery, something else. And that would work just fine. So we're passing around these JavaScript modules. Is this a clear handle on AMD? Everyone get what's happening here? with the modules, tracing dependencies, fetching them, and mapping them to arguments? Okay. So this, I'm going to show you guys, we're actually going to walk through this other project, which is a little bit more of a practical project. So remember, I've got the jQuery module and I've got the Backbone module, and I'm mapping them to $ and Backbone. I could very well map that to something else. I could call that, yay query or something. Then I'm making a new Backbone object and I'm just returning it. So this module represents this Backbone router. Whatever you return is what it will use. So this is actually a constructor. And in my index.html, I still have that data-main, which is over here, JavaScript/bootstrap. So the entry point is going to configure require.js, and it's going to require that app player I just showed you guys, which is a Backbone router. Going to map it to this player, and then I'm going to say new player, and then start history.
But there's no define in this one?
No. This is the entry point. You don't necessarily have to define something with your entry point. You can just use require, because this isn't really a module, this is more of an entry point. I'm not exporting an API at all. I'm consuming modules, but I'm not really exporting anything. Does that make sense? So I know that was a ton, but I'll focus in on the other stuff a little bit later. So, like I said, these are aliases, by the way. So you can say require jQuery, it'll actually dig into vendor jQuery and accordingly. So if we were to load this up, go to player.js, and when player.js hits index, it console logs run. All that does is, if in Backbone world, just checks the route and maps it to a function. So in this case, we didn't have any particular route, and we mapped it to console log run. And if we look at the scripts that were loaded on this page, see how it actually went and traced all these dependencies for us and included them? Even though our index is still empty. Okay? Yeah?
Question.
Please.
Player.js,
Okay.
I don't know if this in the future, like, that requires jQuery to work right there. Why don't we do the required jQuery in this file?
I'm sorry?
So in your Bootstrap.js, you said require jQuery, Backbone, and everything
These aren't required.
are up there.
These are aliases. That just says
So if you do require underscore, look for it in
look for it in vendor. This just gives you a chance to configure your require.
The other ones that just require Backbone. Or,
Yep, so this one actually does the loading. However, even if somebody else is already loading your module, for the modularity's sake, you should still reference every dependency your module has. Okay? You should always say, if I use Backbone, then I'm going to specify my dependencies, I'm going to map it to Backbone. That's not going to go load Backbone 100 times, because require.js will cache it if it's already loaded and just give you Backbone. But what's nice about that is now I can take this player object somewhere else, I can drop it into another project. It knows what it needs, and it'll go handle it accordingly. So now I can suddenly move my code around without being like, okay, this needed Backbone and jQuery. I think this other module installed Hogan for me. Instead, you say, you explicitly declare, these are my dependencies, and so when I move this module around, it will load them accordingly. Makes your code more modular. So that's the rundown on AMD. Does anybody have any more questions on that? Is everybody convinced on JavaScript modules? Because if you're not, I've really let you guys down. All right.
Is it good practice to, in your entry point, you had the require.config object, and then you had a...
Yeah, and then I have my kick it
Would
off.
you put normally like a depths value in that config and just load a JavaScript that way? Or?
I don't really do that. For the same reason as I like to keep the code as modular as possible. Meaning if every module specifies its own dependencies, I can move it wherever I want. I can share it with people, and they can rename things accordingly, and it doesn't matter because I'm explicitly doing it. Whereas the depths, oftentimes people leverage it to install something global, meaning like, I always need jQuery, right? When in most cases you'll find you don't actually always need jQuery when you're moving everything to the client. Usually only your DOM layer needs jQuery. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome. So what we got rid of is global variables are everywhere, and worse, it feels natural to add more. Only two globals are define and require, which are actually, they're going to be leveraged in the next version of JavaScript, maybe module though and import. But the point is JavaScript modules are coming to a future version of JavaScript. And there is a migration path to move away from AMD into that when it comes.
When defining your dependencies, do you have, where would you handle different versions? Would you specify like a requirement?
Sure. Sure. So that's one thing that's nice about the aliasing is that we can in here actually say
That actually maps to
jQuery maps to jQuery version 1. You can also have modules that are kind of layered that inject other modules. So that way when you require jQuery, it can go ahead and see, it can look at something maybe from like your server or something like that to detect which modules you want to use, which app you want to kick off, and then that can return a different module based on that context. So what's nice about this module layer is it gives you the ability to do like, dependency injection and things like that. So versioning could be handled either through kind of a dependency injection layer, or you could map it. I mean, there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but those are two generic ones. Yeah?
How do you do, like, I don't need to chat until this, you just, like on Gmail, I don't need to chat.
Yeah, that's actually an awesome question. I'm glad you asked it. Man, you guys are way more rad than the last people I spoke to. Those guys are like, they're like, you can build websites with this stuff, right? And I'm like, what? What am I doing here, All right. So what we could do is we could say chat function, just like this. We can reference require asynchronously in here. Does that make sense? So now this actually won't be loaded or executed until index gets called. So index is called, or chat was clicked, and now I'm going to go get chat, and I'm going to do this callback with it. What's really, really cool about this is you can actually listen for exceptions, and if your module breaks down, you can run a shutdown and gracefully shut it down and kick your feature back up without ruining the rest of the user's experience, which is not common in JavaScript. An error gets thrown, your site goes to its knees and begs for mercy typically. You get a layer of protection when you're using these modules where you can suddenly catch exceptions and say, all right, I need to gracefully shut down this module, and I need to load it with this coming soon feature, right? All because we can have a notion of where our code gets loaded outside of like script tags.
Would you have to put like a try catch over that require? Is that how you do that, or is it?
Or within it,
Okay.
depending on that, yeah.
Cool.
Does that answer your question in terms of deferring it?
How do you pass chatting?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't implement it. So that would be kind of how I would do it, right? Oh man. So you try catching it, it's running, it fails. Now we can catch that, and we can say, chat, just kidding, So we can do some graceful degradation that way, and the rest of your system can run without this little chat module cascading and ruining everybody's life,
That never happens in Ajax.
never happens in JavaScript. Come on. All right. Was anybody particularly excited about the templating language stuff? 'Cause I'm short on time, and I think I could skip that. It's you can learn about it very quickly, so I'm just going to skip through these really quickly. Talks about compiling templates, and that was the end of it. Thank you. So, all right, git checkout 2. All right, so we're making progress on this app. You guys have no idea what we're building. We're building a music player. Oh man, you know what I'm going to do actually? If any of you guys have laptops and want to follow along, just go to github.com/IamMerrick. It's this rich client music player. If anyone wants to look at the code as we're doing it. So that's my name, yeah. So now I've taken that index that Backbone calls, and I'm making a player view. And like we were doing with AMD modules, we're just requiring our apps and a playlist collection. And my soft wrapping is a complete joke, apparently. And I'm just mapping them accordingly. So see how it's being mapped to player view up here? And now I'm saying, when you hit the home page, make a new player view, and this is the Backbone collection you're going to render. Player view is a Backbone view, and I'm just returning that module accordingly. See how I'm specifying Backbone explicitly here as well? Playlist collection does its own layer thing where it's going to go get a model and all that kind of stuff. And I'll spend more time on Backbone in a second. So if we go over here, forgot we skipped the templating part. All right, so go over here and load this bad boy. One thing I really want you guys to notice is our index.html is still empty. We deferred the populating of this bad boy to JavaScript. And yet we have a pretty awesome DOM constructed from it. Okay? So even though index.html is empty, we deferred to player, well, we deferred to that main, which loads in a player view, and it constructs this markup throughout the page using templates. So that index calls new player view, calls render, does the L, and it just makes the HTML, the document body, that HTML. So this gives you more of an idea of how we use AMD in a real world sense, right? You can require models, you can require views, you can require any old JavaScript module, whether they're constructors, like functions, or modules in general. So now we've got this sort of unfunctional music player. We can interact with it as such. This is constructed with the handlebars templates, by the way. Give you a quick show of that. These are what those look like, yeah.
Does handlebars allow you to dynamically allocate CSS to a particular view, or do you have to?
That's not really a handlebars thing. Mm-hmm. However, AMD does have what's called, it's a CSS plugin. Mm-hmm. AMD, that's another area that it's awesome. I didn't want to really complicate things more than I already have, because there's a lot to cover. But you can actually do this. And that'll grab the CSS file and include it on the page for you. So now this module can also carry around style resources. Obviously, you could put style tags inside of a handlebars template, but it's not quite as dynamic as what you were aiming for. So the way this playlist view works is we have a Backbone view, and I'm saying handlebars compile the template. And you'll notice that I'm using that plugin, and I'm going and I'm fetching that template up here. So text, handlebars. What AMD will do is it'll say text, okay, I need to load this in as text and pass it as a call in the callback as a string. So now we can look at this playlist.handlebars, and it's actually going to be a string. So we're not polluting our DOM with like weird script tags that have templates in them, and we're not doing like our markup inside of our JavaScript with strings. We can load in our templates using AMD and then convert them into a string. So Backbone.js. Backbone gives you structure. They give you a pub sub object that you can mix into anything, so events, and they give you rest. Backbone events. It's an events object you can mix in, so you can say my object, mix in Backbone events, and suddenly you can trigger and bind key values, pub sub. it's integrated throughout the rest of the application. This is actually the same thing that does the events in the model, collection, and view layer. It's the same object. Backbone.js models. Models can be used to sync with the server, meaning you can give it like a URL, and it'll go get JSON, and you can change the JSON, you can hit save, and it'll do a post with that new JSON. They can also be used as view models, so you can listen for events on when these things change and update your DOM accordingly. And then these change events, like I said, so if I have a model and I'm saying, tell me when title changes, suddenly I can do bindings like you would in Angular or things like that, and echo to the DOM accordingly, right? Collections are a set of models. They're useful for working with REST services, so I can get all my people. People would be a collection of person. Does that make sense? Backbone collections just are a group of backbone models. don't worry, I'm gonna get into this more. Collections can be represented by a view as well as models, and you can listen to change events on them as well and cascade that to your view layer. And then you get all the access to underscore methods. They're aliased.
Didn't underscore remove their AMD support?
They did. However, you can consume non-AMD modules just fine.
Okay.
And I could show you afterwards if you want.
Okay.
Views represent a DOM element. So every backbone view has what's called an L property, and that's the DOM element that it represents. Event delegation, meaning my view, click, I can delegate it down. Listen for model and collection events, and that's the fundamental for view bindings. So now,
So in theory, we could bind any of those events to a particular keystroke.
exactly. You could bind those to a keystroke. You could say, when my server gives me new data, call render. When the user clicks this button, call update model. The main thing that I really like to stress in terms of building apps this way, and this is, the guys that have done more thick clients before JavaScript. Sorry. They would laugh if they heard this. They're like, oh, dude, I was doing that when you were in diapers. But it's actually kind of new to the JavaScript world. And that's, do your work in the data layer of your application and make your views as declarative as possible. If I have a contact card, okay, that's just some markup that knows how to render a person, all I should do is I should describe where those things connect. I should say, this is where first name goes, this is where last name goes. That's it with the view layer. The older way of doing this was like, grab this class on Ajax and get the person's first name and then append it into where that was, right? Grab things, more or less. However, the more declarative you can make your views, the more you get for free. And I'm gonna show you that when you work in the data layer of your JavaScript. Okay, so now we've got this playlist view, which is this guy. We've created a new backbone view. We told it this is your template. This is that event delegation. Whenever you get clicked on an anchor tag, whenever an anchor tag gets clicked, call select song, okay? Does anyone have any questions? That select song is a method right here. So what you can do is now whenever this L gets clicked, it'll say what got clicked inside of me, right? Oh, it's an anchor tag. That means I need to call select song. So click A, select song. All select song does is it triggers an event and gives it what was selected. So when this trigger happens, we've got this parent view called player, which just says, hey, this playlist when you change the current song, when select gets triggered, this .play gets called, and I call this .model.play, okay? So now when this model play happens, what is model, you might ask? It's a player right here. Because I'm saying apps models player, this .model is equal to new player, and this is where the real awesomeness happens within your app. So I'm saying play, set current song, And this really is way too complex. I'm sorry, guys. And then I'm just going to set the song on my model object. So now when that happens, yeah, we can suddenly see that just because I clicked this and triggered a single event in my model layer, this view up here just knew it needed to change because the data changed. The current song changed, and so it cascaded accordingly. To give you guys a better visual of that, I'm going to just export the model on the window. Open up the console, and I can, let me just say demo is here. See how the view just was declarative enough that when I hit demo.play3, those views both knew what to do when the state changed to 3. It says, I need to highlight and play this really garbage techno song. Sorry. It says, I need to highlight this is the active song. I need to pull in the album artwork. I need to update the title. I need to update the artist. And I need to make sure the other buttons know what to do. So now we can say, actually, just kidding, play 1, play 2, play 5, play 6. So what's really cool about this is now we can get a push event that comes in from some other part of this and just requires the model and says, all right, whenever I get a socket event that says play song 6, it means there's somebody DJing, and I'm just going to set my state to also play 6. The rest of your view knows how to do it accordingly because we listen to events. The way that works, I'm going to show you. We have our model reference, which I exported, and all that does, it says when you change the current song, update my controls. Does that make sense? So we have these change events. When the current song attribute is changed on the model, just call this update controls. We can also do something like this, right? This.model.on change current song. So see how that also listened for it? We essentially just put another thing in the pub sub that said, when the change event gets fired on this attribute, do this as well. So when the current song is changed, call alert test. In that other case, we're calling update controls, which just re-rendered the controls view.
Is it possible to pass an array of functions instead of having to declare each on-change event?
I believe it is, yeah. I think there's particular syntax for it. Maybe an object, though. I'm not sure. We can also, to give you guys an idea of this, that will also get called when the current song changes because of these next buttons. See? So this is the fundamental layer of how Knockout.js, Ember.js, Angular.js, Backbone.js, Spine.js, all of these things work. They listen for events, and then they bind them to some sort of callback. And all these client-side key value observation frameworks, or MVC frameworks, work. Backbone is more bare bones, so you can see more what's going on, and you can make performance tunes because of that. You can say, for example, Ember.js, sometimes you may not want to re-render your entire view every time that one attribute changes. You may want to just do something very particular. Do you know what I mean? Ember.js, because it sugarcoats things so much, you sometimes don't have as fine-grained control over the events as you'd like. Whereas in Backbone, it's very apparent what you're doing. So update controls gets called. This controls render gets called. And all render does is it just takes whatever the current song is, calls it to JSON, which is the Backbone method, and it just says my L's HTML is this. Does that make sense? So when update song gets called, this method gets propagated to, and it knows what to do accordingly. Again, with the event delegation, when buttons.next is clicked, call next. When buttons previous, call previous. And all those do is those trigger things that change the model. That's it. So you can wire your views when they get input to just change your model, and because your views are declarative, they will cascade. They will reflect whatever the state of the model is. And that's the fundamental piece of not having to maintain a data layer or a text layer, right? You can now just maintain your data layer, make your views declarative, and they will accordingly reflect. Does that make sense? So I realize there's a lot to cover, and it resolved the 4 concerns that we originally had. And this was more so to give you guys a brief impact of what it would look like if you didn't have anything in your HTML file. If everything was delegated to your JS, and then you just consumed APIs. Like we just pulled those songs from a service using collections, which unfortunately I didn't get to show you guys. So these URLs, if you want to learn more about this stuff. To do MVC is actually a really great project in the case that you're like, Backbone sucks or Spine sucks. All they do is they take all these frameworks, Clojure, Angular, Ember, all these kinds of MVC approaches, and they implement the exact same app in that framework. So it's a to-do app written like 27 times in different robust client-side things. So you can pick what's best for your project. Ember will oftentimes, I bring it back to Ember because that's that's kind of my love that I look at when I'm cheating on Backbone, but that was a weird thing to say, man. Anyways, this is awesome. The music player we built, if you want to spend more time, email questions, jump on IRC, chat. Please feel free to harass me. I realize you guys just took in like a ton of information. I'm more than happy to consult you guys, whatever. This is my information. I'm on Twitter. I just talk about nerd stuff all the time. Open source wise, I'm on GitHub. This is my email. Again, please don't hesitate to ask any questions or anything like that. That's my website, which is worthless. It's like I haven't touched it in like 2 years, so I don't even know why I have it on here. This idea that I'm going to make it useful. And that's it. So, yeah, thanks guys.